I don't really know what the number is, and certainly we hear anything from 7 out of 10 to 9 out of 10 transactions don't realize their full potential. I don't know if the number is as important as recognizing that I think if we are going to continue at this rate of M&A activity, the 2017 blip excluded, we're going to have to pay a lot more attention not only to the convergence of people and process, but also the application of technology to that process, which I think just intensifies the challenge. So it's wonderful to have the leadership of E&Y, who truly are, as I've said, at the forefront of this discussion, to lead a conversation together with Greg Bedrosian, one of our favorite veteran deal makers, what I refer to as one of our academic practitioners.
Thank you.
I look forward to this conversation very much.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
So we'll just do a quick round of intros. As we were listening to the topics kind of coming forward to our presentation, it did really strike us pretty significantly the human element in the context of all the technology and digital change. So we're really happy to sort of talk about that, because in transactions we do really need to get the talent working together and the people working together. So I'm Liz Feely. I'm a principal in the People Advisory Services at EY. I'm a leader in our transactions business. Spend pretty much all my time focusing on making the people aspects of either a merger, spin-off, divestiture work. So.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. I'm Chris Laux. I'm also a principal in our People Advisory Services practice at EY. I spent considerable time leading up some of our larger integrations and divestitures that we support for our client groups, dealing primarily with the people issues, a lot of the org and talent matters, and how they can successfully complete the transactions in a way that is most beneficial from a headcount and a cost perspective.
Great. I'm Greg Bedrosian. Great to be here this morning. So I'm a managing partner and co-CEO at Drakestar Partners. We're an international investment bank focused on M&A, corporate finance, and private equity co-investing, predominantly in the tech, media, and communications sector. We're evenly spread as a firm across the US and Europe, and I actually spent half my career living and working in Europe and half in the US. So elements around transaction success, both domestically and in a cross-border nature, are areas of interest to me, and look forward to contributing to the panel today.
Great. So we didn't actually plan it exactly like this, but obviously technology and digital disruption is really accelerating the pace of change. And there's really no place that this is happening more than in the M&A environment, in the transaction environment. We spend a lot of time in general talking to our clients about the future of work. And how to move organizations forward. What does the future workforce need to look like? What does the future organizational structure need to be? What are the key capabilities that you're going to need from your workforce? Honestly, many organizations today, I think as we've heard, are not necessarily prepared for all of the work that's coming their way and the change in the work. One conversation we're constantly having with our clients is that up until now, we got really specialized and really deep in all the functions, and we worked really well vertically and went all the way down. And what we're seeing is technology and digital really driving everything horizontal. So you have to work across functions, across organizations. You've got to work with your partnering organizations and your vendor organizations and really horizontal value chains. And what we're seeing is that many organizations are not structured or may not have the right leadership to kind of work in that way. So we are spending, in general, a tremendous amount of time talking about the future of work with our clients. But in a deal, that's even more accelerated. And one of the topics we'll talk about today is how do you kind of make the organizational and people components of a transaction work? How do you link that to the financials? And the theme of our clients really going at transacting, but also trying to transform at the same time. We're seeing a tremendous amount of pressure just given the speed of change. It's not enough anymore to get the deal done and close and then play out your transformation plans 1, 2, 3 years post-close. Everything else is getting accelerated forward. So we'll talk about that. This is a strategic value of, I think the human element's been brought up quite a bit. We partner with Cornell on some of our future work discussions, and they remind us that this is the fourth industrial revolution, and every time we've sort of said, oh my gosh, we're going to lose all these jobs and these types of things. And we agree there'll be different jobs and new jobs that will come out. But in order to really make work work, it will really require a change in people and in your workforce. So we're spending quite a bit of time talking to clients about what that looks like. So we'll get into that in the context of our discussion. So we're going to have kind of a people representative and also a financial representative here. So in the context of transactions, I'll talk to these guys. Chris, I'll start with you. In terms of operating model alignment and really aligning the go-forward organization, the future operating model from a headcount and an organization perspective, what do you see our clients doing in terms of org structure as well as talent components of that?
Yeah, Liz, I think the first thing we're seeing is what you just alluded to a minute ago, is that we're no longer projecting just what is day one going to look like, or what does the organization need to look like to get to that closing date. We're now projecting what that future operating model is going to look like very near after day one, a year or two after day one. And so when we're setting our baselines from a headcount perspective, we're taking a point in time when the entities agree that this is where we're going to start measuring our success or measuring our change from. But then we're building the ongoing financial cost structure as well as the headcount and operating model and reporting lines and all of those things off of where we're going to be. And companies are looking for very efficient ways that they can do some of that modeling. They want to be doing that modeling as early as possible. They want to be taking into account, as Liz was saying, all of the different vendors, all of the different outsourced arrangements, all of the different systems that they use as they build that sort of future state operating model. And they want to tie their headcount to that. And it's no longer just about getting to day one. It's no longer just about figuring out how we can operate in that short time frame. But now it's about what are we going to look like in the future and how are we really going to transform the business as we move forward. So that's certainly a trend that we're seeing in that space.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that concept, I mean, we see on the M&A side, especially when we're representing sellers, that it is interesting, certain buyers, corporate culture-wise, will run that analysis, but on a very general basis for fear that issues of redundancies, synergies, what's happening to founders post-deal may come out too soon and may jeopardize the buyer's ability to actually close a deal. And as a result of that, though, it ends up being rushed toward the tail end once it's clear that buyer X is indeed the winner in an auction, for example. And we find from the investment banking side that a lot of that is actually rushed toward the end, partly because people don't want to face some of those difficult decisions, and partly from a signaling perspective to not have the deal too baked before it's clear who the winner is.
Yeah, and so I think one thing that we've talked about is sort of the announce to close phase and really how to capitalize on that, because we would agree some of that is happening sort of behind the scenes.
Right.
But Chris, maybe we could talk about how are clients, either from an org design or from a job mapping perspective, what used to be anathema in terms of talking about new org structures, workforce planning, all in the announce to close phase. How are clients doing that in an accelerated way?
Yeah, absolutely. So once you can get past at least to a point of exclusivity, right? When you get past the sort of competing bids and you have two parties that want to work in common and you have a closing date in the future, what we've seen a lot of clients doing is using a clean team concept and then using technology to provide the means to do some of this pre-closing modeling that we're talking about. And so EY, for example, has an Oregon Talent Hub tool. It's a proprietary database that we've created where you can take information out of HR systems from both sides of a particular deal and put that information basically into a sandbox. And you can use that tool to sort of model what is our future reporting lines going to look like. You can do it on a no-names basis. We can do it in a very secure environment. And we can do it in a way that allows them to do some projections around the future operating model, allows them to do some initial thoughts around restructurings or things that they want to do, and see it visually. They can see it from an analytics perspective. They can also see it on org charts or different ways that we can visually show them the impact to the business. And so using a clean team environment like this in a third party can often give you the opportunity to run very detailed analysis on headcount information without then sharing those data privacy and security matters with either side as you report out, just giving them a sense of what is possible and what the future organization might look like. So that's a way that we're seeing some of our clients accelerate that time frame and really start to look at things transformationally, even before they get to closing, when all of the limitations and restrictions tend to go away.
And Greg, one thing that we've seen is sort of the linkage and the increased discipline of that planning with the synergies. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the synergy achievement and what we're seeing in the deal market in terms of timing of when people will wait for them to come out versus accelerating them?
Sure. Well, I mean, different M&A deals happen for different reasons, right? So in some cases, if it's a U.S. corporate acquiring a European corporate, there's often less headcount synergies by design. It's more of a geographic or customer expansion, but there may be elements around the technology or product that are being aligned or unified. Conversely, especially in the technology industry, whether it's in Silicon Valley or the East Coast, you're seeing a lot of the big global tech players acquiring the young, mid-sized, venture-backed or entrepreneur-owned businesses. In those cases, there's an element of synergy in terms of how does that business plug into an Oracle, a Cisco, an Amazon, et cetera, and what are the financial synergies. But also, there's a career development issue that we see a lot of, especially with younger venture-backed businesses on the sale to a big corporate, where a lot of the planning tools that you guys at E&Y are talking about are highly relevant, because there could be a financial deal completed and some of the top talent, especially in a tech company, are then wondering, is there a role for me? How does this fit in? Am I being synergized out, so to speak, with not a role? Or is this actually a chance for me to operate on a bigger stage? And often, again, without the planning tools that you all are talking about, some of that becomes less obvious, and so some of the talent then between announcement and closing will start looking for other opportunities, because they'll figure, the new opportunity, the new acquirer can't be as interesting as what I currently have. So those are some of the variables.
That's perfect. Maybe, Chris, we can talk a little bit about some of the org design, but particularly kind of from a leadership and key talent and what we see our clients doing. One of the things that I've talked to clients about, especially in a merger, but also in a spin, right? In a merger, it's sort of like people think somebody wins, somebody loses. And I think one of the discussions that we're trying to have with our clients is to say, listen, if you're number 2 and you just bought number 5, this is your one-time chance, right? To build your bench, to build succession planning, and to sort of legitimately, not raid, but own that talent. So how do we change this more from an X versus Y conversation to a succession planning conversation, to really understand what you need. So you want to talk about how our clients are really accelerating and through data really giving tremendous amount of visibility to those leadership and talent discussions?
Yeah, absolutely. So part of what we can accomplish as we're talking about this pre-closing period and some of the planning that we can be doing is taking a look at the analytics of the workforce we have involved. And Liz just mentioned succession planning, for example. Being able to take a look at that headcount data and start to predict where we're going to have some retirements in the future, where in parts of the business that are critically important to success of the deal do we have potential leadership turnover for other reasons, and running some analytics around that information and starting to plan for areas of focus. That allows you then to focus on, well, do we need to keep some key talent for perhaps the acquired entity in particular situations where we know that we are starting to age, or we know that we are making transformational changes. The other thing it allows us to do is really think about that future leadership team in terms of our new purpose and our new direction. Right. In the past, it was always, at least from a merger standpoint, typically, as Liz was saying, you have a winner and a loser per se, and many times the loser, apart from a few leaders, were sort of pushed to the side, and it was the winner who would just sort of move forward with their leadership team. We're seeing far more integration of the teams these days, and a lot more related to what is the new purpose of the organization going forward, and what kind of team do we need to do that. And we're seeing that many times the talent that's coming in from the acquired entities bring a new perspective, they bring new skill sets, and the ability to look at that in the clean team environment, look at some of their performance management, look at some of their competencies and capabilities, really gives you the ability to start to transform what that leadership team looks like, as opposed to the traditional sort of plug and play and move on that you had seen in previous years.
Yeah, and just one thing, as it relates to future work, EY's now spent a lot of time to develop what we call our digital leadership competencies. So not only are we looking at sort of base competencies of, if you're a CFO, you understand sort of the financials and those types of things, but what does it actually take today to be a digital leader? And some of those elements are 360-degree thinking, hyper collaboration. So when we go through a talent process, not only are we looking for what we'll call core leadership skills or core capabilities, but we're now trying to look at those additional capabilities that are going to enable you to operate more sort of in a horizontal way. I guess one thing, Greg, from a spin-off perspective, I'm interested in how you guys look at sort of the leadership of the team. One of the things we're seeing is organizations try to accelerate some of those leadership decisions, particularly for some of the road shows and those types of things. Do you want to talk about that
in the context of
in a spin-off context?
A company divesting, or right? So those are interesting ones, and if it's in a public company case where the new entity will also be public, certainly that needs to be addressed well in advance. In a private company situation, that's again often an opportunity for the next generation of leadership to kind of take over one of the divisions that will then be independent. In other cases, and our firm's involved in a few right now, keep the names confidential, but in those cases, they're actually looking for the buyer to solve some of the leadership issues. And we've earmarked a few logical acquirers where that division, maybe without the top leadership, but with the base technology and operations, can then plug in nicely to a new acquirer. The risk in that, of course, is if some of those handful of select acquirers don't actually want to do the transaction, and it's a different group or a private equity sponsor that's owning it, then they need to actually fix the leadership issue before completing a deal. And that, for the seller, if it's not fully baked, could have a negative impact on deal terms, valuation, et cetera.
Yeah, I do think, just following up on Greg's point there around different situations, different buyers bring different capabilities to fill positions to the table. The one thing that being able to do some of this analysis pre-deal does is it helps you set your timetables effectively. So in the past, perhaps you would move into a transaction, you'd set a closing date, or you'd set a particular target date of something you wanted to have accomplished without the full knowledge of what kind of workforce you were inheriting or what kind of workforce was available to you. Now you have the ability to predict for those positions that you want to recruit for. You can set recruiting timelines and effectively manage how quickly you think you can fill those positions, whether or not you need to bring in third parties to help with those assessments. And it really gives you the ability to adapt to a particular buyer or the different party in play, and see how quickly you can do that, and then effectively map the timelines associated with getting the entire business up and running and getting that leadership team in place. So it really helps you put more predictability around that, which we found to be very successful in setting the actual timelines of a deal and sticking to those timelines, and not having to push dates because you can't find the right leadership team or the right key stakeholders in some of these situations.
That's great. So Chris, let's talk a little bit about, it used to be day one readiness. You had to be ready for day one, and then we'll figure it out after that. Can we talk a little bit about how our clients are really infusing transformation into their org design and their talent planning, especially driven by digital or AI, and where they can streamline functions or consolidate within a customer organization, a disparate group, to really deliver the value?
Sure. So in the past, Liz, as you talked about, what we would typically see is, let's just take HR, for example. Two HR organizations are coming together, and what you would typically see is the one HR organization who was the acquirer would typically sort of dictate and say, we'd like to keep a handful of your people who have some legacy knowledge, but really we have our own service delivery model over here, and we're just going to plug them into our existing structure. What we're seeing now is a completely different take on that process. What we're seeing now is an assessment of the transformation of that HR business to meet the needs of the new, broader broader and larger organization. And that typically will mean doing things like reassessing your shared services structures, reassessing the systems that you're using. And so what we'll find is the headcount modeling is no longer just simply identifying a few key people we want to bring along and eliminating the rest and sort of helping them out the door. It's now an assessment of, no, we're not only going to change who we're bringing in, we're going to change our own existing headcount. We're going to relocate them to a more beneficial location in order to provide services to the broader organization, and or we're going to outsource a piece that we didn't outsource before because, for example, maybe there's a new systems play, maybe there's a new volume play that we can do, which will really enhance our business in the longer term. So they're looking at things much more transformationally than they were because they have access to that information sooner, as opposed to just making some plug-and-play decisions and then dealing with those a year or two down the road. And it really gives organizations an opportunity to optimize their cost structures much more quickly than they had in the past, and really make sure that they are building an organization that's transformed for the future success of the business, as opposed to simply getting the deal done.
Yeah, so I think also from a financial modeling perspective, and Greg, this would be interesting, we're also seeing our clients really tie out the headcount and the dollars. I often say if you can get HR and finance on the same page from kind of a headcount baseline and a finance baseline perspective early on, you're in really good shape because you can really see how it plays out. Do we want to talk a little bit about the rigor that we're seeing our clients kind of drive that, Chris, and then Greg, get a reaction kind of from a financial performance perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think as we're talking about some of these transformational opportunities, the rigor that we're seeing is HR and finance are closely linked to track the costs associated with these initiatives. So it's no longer simply, what is the eliminated severance, associated with the headcount that we're not going to keep, or calculations associated with that. It's now, what is the cost of the transformation that we're talking about in the initiatives? And the finance team is working closely with, the headcount teams to put discrete synergy initiatives and tracking in the tools that we've developed to make sure you can actually categorize and quantify the value that's being generated or the cost that's being generated for some of the different changes that are happening, and then roll those up from a reporting perspective on a regular basis. And so we're seeing the use of synergy aggregator type tools that not only pull in the headcount costs and the headcount changes that are happening and tie those to specific synergy initiatives, but also the non-headcount real estate, systems, other costs that are out there, and aggregate those together to really give some precise reporting in the short term that helps the businesses really plan for the cost and capital that they're going to need to make some of these things a reality.
Yeah, I mean, just to tie that into some of the things that we see in deals, a lot of it, a lot of what incites the rigor is to the extent that management teams' compensation and incentives are tied to some of those benchmarks. So what we've seen is, and I've seen in my career, people get extremely focused if some of those metrics that you're talking about somehow lead to 2-3 years out, extra bonus compensation or rewards for the leadership team. And that is a great way to get everyone to focus on that, while the deal is coming together. The other element, which this topic just reminded me of, is the other element is in many deals, especially in the middle market, where I know a lot of this audience is active, have earnout elements, and those who aren't familiar with the concept, it's basically you get paid a certain portion of the purchase price today, and then over some period of time down the road, it could be 1 or 2 years, the balance of the purchase price is paid if certain benchmarks are hit. And in those cases, and I'd actually be curious in Ian Y's experience, that always creates, it's often an investment banker's and a deal lawyer's way of bridging a difference in price, but it often also wedges the old organizational structure in place longer than it should, because there's always the measurement issue of, well, if I'm going to be paid over a couple of year period of time, what am I being measured against? And you need to keep my team together so that we can perform against this benchmark to get paid. So I'd be interested actually in how that plays into some of the work you guys do at E&Y.
Yeah, I think what we've seen is we have seen the ability to measure that more effectively and give accurate assessments of how that's tracking. In my own personal experience, I've seen less of a use, and I must admit I don't do as much middle market as probably some folks in the room. I've seen less of a use of escrows and much shorter time frames on those sort of earnouts. associated with those leadership teams because of the changes and the ongoing disposition of the business and the way that you want to move forward. And so this, I think, has given us the ability to track a little more effectively whether or not these things are met in the shorter term, as opposed to having to wait for extended periods to see results. And I think that's benefiting in the way that you can structure some of those transactions.
Yeah, I like, Greg, what you brought up. Our future work model kind of has two big components to it. It's sort of operating model, which we call the hardware of the company, right? It's the org structure, it's the governance, it's the processes, it's all the technology. And we're just seeing a tremendous amount of activity, right? Especially as the technology comes in and changes. You have to change your processes. Sometimes you're changing your structure to allow those processes to go horizontal. So we're seeing a tremendous amount of change in the operating model. But what Greg brought up is the second part of that is the operating environment. We talk about that as the software of the company, right? This is your purpose. This is your culture. This is your leadership. This is your incentives. And so what we're really trying to do in every single transaction is sort of lay this old school transparency on top of every single deal and see what levers are you pushing, in this transaction or in this transformation. And then how are we making sure that both the hardware and the software are lined up within the organization? Because ultimately, you need your leaders and you need your workforce to sort of drive that. And just some quick examples is if you're looking at customer transformations through technology, oftentimes you're not going back and looking at how do you reframe your org structure or what's our workforce plan. We're not going to need level 1, level 2 call center folks anymore, with some of the AI and the robotics. So we're really kind of trying to work with organizations on their hardware and the software of the organizations to make sure it lines up and it's successful. Because ultimately, you still need your leaders to lead and your workforce to drive. So Chris, just a quick question on some of the transition planning that we see in the context. So all of this accelerated, Oregon Talent Hub is a version of digital, right? It's a sort of accelerated employee data in a very short, or workforce data in a very short period of time to really drive forward-looking visibility. What does that enable from a transition planning perspective and allows companies to be successful?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest benefits we've seen is the ability to define a clear process of how you're going about doing some of the transition planning, and then get to answers a little more quickly than you had in the past. So the ability to use technology to quickly, as I mentioned, sort of create that sandbox of planning and start to make some headcount decisions even before you get to the actual closing of the transaction gives you the ability to prepare communications to your employees, communicate that when you're going to have true dates of when you're going to have decisions made that they can count on and rely on and expect, and it allows them to remain engaged. The other thing it does is it allows you to identify some of those key leaders more quickly who can start to disseminate some of the messages and the purpose and the reason why we're doing this deal and start to play those key stakeholder and change agent roles that you need in a situation like this to engage with the workforce, start to have some of that direct reporting sooner than you could in the past, and really start to have that new identity take place in a much faster time frame than you could previously.
Great. So I think we'll talk to a quick case study that we've been working on, and then Greg, it would be good to get a perspective on the market and what's coming up, and then take some questions. So Chris, we're currently working on a pretty complicated transaction that has sort of acquisitions, spin-offs, divestitures, everything going on. So
yeah, absolutely. So a large transaction, 2 global companies coming together, and then they're ultimately going to split into 3 new enterprises. And part of what we've been helping them do is use our Oregon Talent Hub to manage the headcount movements associated with all of this transaction. The deal didn't actually close. The merger of the 2 entities didn't close until fall of this year, but we actually were able to start all the way back in 2016 some of the organizational design work associated with the transaction within certain data privacy and security requirements. So we were able to do things on a no-names basis, on a positional basis within our tool to allow them to start to map out the framework of what they thought these 3 spin codes would look like, these 3 new entities would look like as they combine their 2 organizations. We were able to play a role as a clean team advisor to them so we could have access to much of the headcount information but not share it with either side. So we weren't breaking any competitive rules in terms of sharing information in case the deal were to break up or other situations were to occur. And by doing that, they really got a head start on some of the predictive predictability of the cost of the transaction, the timing of the transaction, and even some of those leadership positions they were able to start preparing for. And so we effectively used it to do that. In addition, we've now moved into the phase where we're helping them work through the actual talent selection associated with the transaction. So they've now closed the deal and they can share some of that headcount data, and we can now start to look at actual individuals, their performance management histories, their competency histories, and start to really build the structure of those three institutions that are going to come out of this transaction. And each one of them has a unique identity and a unique culture. And so the benefit of being able to do this now is to be able to build out those leadership teams, be able to start to have them operate even within the combined structure that they're in now as three distinct entities, so they can start to build their new identities, start to work with their new purpose, and be driven by what they will make them successful when they do actually split a year from now in the marketplace. And so the tool itself has enabled that in a very secure and, as I mentioned, data protected way to accelerate a lot of those transformational activities.
Thanks, Chris. So Greg, just curious, all the discussion, the market and how people are critical in terms of the transaction landscape and making it happen.
Yeah, so I mean, we're seeing both in middle market and larger scale transactions still a relatively strong M&A market, especially in some of the sectors our firm focuses on: tech, media, and communications. One of the elements to add to some of the work you guys are doing on complexity that creates uncertainty, I mean, one transaction our firm's not directly involved in, but there's some aftermath to it that we may be, which is the big AT&T Time Warner merger, which the building's right down the street, so reminds me. There you have regulatory overhang, so a lot of their senior team, they're both trying to figure out what the combined business would look like, how they would redefine the divisions within the companies, but then they've also been telling their teams internally certain dates when decisions will be made, but the regulators and the deal itself has now dragged many, many quarters past what was originally anticipated. And what that's doing is creating a lot of uncertainty around a lot of the talent there in terms of what they should be doing, through not necessarily any fault of the leadership team, but just the way of the deal dynamic. So we're seeing that as an element. The other thing, because our firm is very cross-border focused, a lot of the cultural and legal issues around a French company's workforce management relative to a US company, let alone state by state within the US, which still varies, are all nuances that are important that I'm sure a lot of the modeling that you guys do really helps both acquirer and seller work through.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, we did a spinoff where HR is often I call it the last baton in the relay. And so for one transaction, based on all of the workforce actions that would have to take place in Europe, we sort of backed up and said, it was a spin. We said, okay, yeah, you were planning to have your legal entities by March. They need to be done by January, because if you're going to get it through the UK and Germany and all this and still spin on 11/1, here's the timeline. So what we're able to do with the data is get really precise to explain, here's the workforce, here's where it's going, here are the legal entities that they're sitting in, here's where they have to move, and here's all the timing that surrounds that. So we're really trying to, they actually did wind up listening. They did set up the entities much quicker than was anticipated, and actually that one was a particularly well-executed spinoff from an operational perspective. So I know we'll probably be done in a few minutes. I don't know if that includes questions or if we want to ask questions now. Yeah. Does anyone have questions? Okay. All right.
All right.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.